it's important to realize when we are all victims, when we need each other, and not to continue to fight in the corners of those that exploit us. But what has decolonization, decoloniality, and reparatory justice to do with ecumenism? And I'm sorry, I don't know why I thought this was supposed to be the Finnish Ecumenical Council. I don't even know if something like that exists. So I had tried to cheat the system and correct it when I realized the mistake, but unfortunately you are seeing it, which means I did not succeed in doing that. But I think these are fundamental questions for our time. I try here to say, where are we in this world? The first circle here with the three circles each other. At the core of this world that we're living in is the hierarchy of humanity, which was introduced as a permanent kind of understanding of humanity, that human beings are not just one family, that human beings are a multiple kind of families in which some have achieved the highest degree of development of being human, and others are still struggling to extricate themselves from wild animals. So they have slightly moved beyond wild animals, but they are so far away from achieving apex, what it means to be. And this is the core principle in a way that continues to govern how we survive in this world. At its peak, the European male, who eventually becomes the white male. Europeans did not simply begin by being white. They became white at some point. They were Europeans. Then as they began to contrast themselves as they moved around the new world, whiteness began to emerge as an organizing principle. With the European male becoming the standard of what it meant to be human, not the European female either. So the European male was at the very top. And then everybody else was then classified from there onwards. In the second circle, this key organizing principle also became the justification for the enslavement of humans, based not on simply having the military advantage of the time, because enslavement has always been there. I mean, humanity from time immemorial always looked for an advantage to enslave the neighbors, but always being aware that when we became weak, we could also be enslaved. So the Egyptians enslaved people from the Middle East and the Assyrians and so on. But when the Egyptian empire crumbles, the Egyptians are also enslaved. So enslavement did not become a permanent apportionment of any particular group until the development of this racialized hierarchy of humanity. Then a class of people was supposedly meant to always be slaves. So it didn't matter whether you now also had an opportunity to enslave others. If you were black, you were meant to be enslaved. If you were indigenous, you were meant to be enslaved, and so on. So it became really a justification why some people had to be traded as property. And we know that this happened. And now there is more and more information that is coming to light about the trading or the enslavement of Africans through the eastern coast by the Arabs and so on into the Middle East and so on. Just recently, I was shocked to discover there were 2 million black people in Iraq. Of all places, I didn't know that. Only last year did it become clear that there is a population of 2 million people of African descent that are living in Iraq. For centuries, they've been there, but still being enslaved, even to date. So this has happened over time, the enslavement. But enslavement, I was speaking to a group and I said, my work in HIV and AIDS helped me in a way to understand the impact of the transatlantic slave trade in particular. Because when HIV and AIDS hit the African continent, we sometimes are very happy to say it was indiscriminate. But I don't think that's a correct interpretation. HIV and AIDS had a specific target group, the breadwinner class. That was the target. The others were collateral damage. The people that were working are, in most cases, the people that are still very sexually active. Because in most communities, our working class, the group that is still working, is not only working in the industry, it is also working in the regeneration and replenishing of the human race, of the human family. So we work during the day, we work during the night, or we work during the night and we work during the day. And these are the people that were the main target of HIV. And then the result was communities that had very elderly people, the pensioned class, and the very young people. And so we started having these ideas of child-headed families or the very elderly-headed families, because a whole entire class of breadwinners had been wiped out. And this is what enslavement did in Africa. The breadwinner class, the defenders of their communities, the breadwinners of their communities are the ones that were shipped. And then we have this community with the elderly and the young people. And so it dawned on me, colonization became even easier. Because who was to defend these communities? Because enslavement came before colonization, and the people were taken away. And then colonization came on board. So the last circle is on European imperialism and colonialism. These things are not as visible today, but they are present. The enslavement continues, colonization continues, the hierarchy of humanity continues. So when I walk into a supermarket sometimes, even when I was a guest professor at the university in Germany, so young people working in the supermarkets that following you around, they don't even know what I do. But because of how I look, they think, if I don't want to steal, then there must be something else sinister that I'm trying to do. So they try to accompany you. The ministry of accompaniment then begins in the supermarket, right? So they're walking around the supermarket with you. When you stop, they stop. When you walk, they walk. And it's so uncomfortable, but I got used to it. So one day I stopped and said, why don't we just walk together? And you help me, because I'm trying to find my wife a very good dress because it's her birthday. So why don't you help me? Said, oh no, I'm trying to do this and that. And I said, oh no, we all know what you're trying to do. And to make it easier, we could actually walk together and we can be talking and I do my shopping and then I leave. So we became friends eventually with a young lady. So in Germany. Yes, in Germany. I haven't tried in Finland. I didn't go shopping that much, so I don't know if it also happens in Finland, but these things do happen sometimes. Now, on the other side, I have the hostile to people that look. It is also a person like myself looking at another person like myself and having prejudice. Because the whole system that has trained us has told me that people like me mean no good. Okay? So Black people are also being racist towards each other because we have internalized the whole concept, white supremacism of whiteness. We were talking about how even in indigenous African languages, the concept of whiteness and of white supremacism has found expression. When I go to my rural home, and I have friends, people that I went to school with, that did not make it in this system. When Grace found me, they were not with me, so they are still in the rural areas. And I was picked up by Grace, and I'm here today. When I go home, they expect me to buy them something to drink. I know Lutherans don't drink. Oh, you drink water, right? Okay. So when, yeah, sometimes when I say to my friends, let's go have a drink, I do have an SDA friend, Ezra. And he always say, but you know I don't drink. I said, Ezra, are you telling me you don't even drink water? And I said, oh no, I thought you meant, because in Zimbabwe, when you say let's go have a drink, it means a beer. And so on. So when you go to buy friends beer, they will call you our white man in my mother language. We don't say that in English. We say it in my own mother language. So I become their white man because I have money. And now I have some authority because, oh, you are now based in Geneva, so you have become a white man. So the whole idea of whiteness goes far deeper and beyond the skin pigmentation. It is a structural, ideological thing. So racial prejudice is there. When I get to Ghana on another trip, the person that is serving me looks like just myself. But the questions that are put to me show that this system does not trust me as a Black person, even as I am getting into a supposedly Black country. But my friend, who is a German professor that I am with, gets first-class treatment. It's like they will carry him through the whole system at the airport. And I'm saying, but I thought I should be looking like I've come home. Because if I don't say anything, how do you know I'm not even from here? This is how this system works. So racial prejudice is prevalent. If you are Black, if you're Asian, with the COVID, you know what it did to people that look Asian. Joy Eva, one of our colleagues at the WCC, was spotted in Norway, I think. Yes, for being COVID-19. Not for bringing COVID-19, she was COVID-19. And somebody spat in her face. Yes, this is this world. Discrimination, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. For looking in a particular way, people begin to selectively either over-apply regulations. So the regulations are there. It's not like people are doing things that are not in the books, but sometimes the things are over-applied on some people and not on others. And therefore, the elements of discrimination begin to emerge. But there is the biggest problem, which is systemic racism. Our structures, our institutions do grant opportunities to some people and not to others. So it could be that Finnish could be easily elected or appointed a bishop in Tanzania or in Zimbabwe, right? It could happen. And I think the church in Zimbabwe could easily accept that, right? And they might even be bragging about it. We now have a white bishop. Soon after independence, that would be, yeah, okay, it's still colonization is still fresh. But now I think it could easily happen. Reverse it. Can a Zimbabwean become a Finnish bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church? And how will the people respond and react? A friend of mine from Cameroon, but who is now a German citizen, is a Catholic priest. So he gets a parish because the Catholic Church in Germany is running short of priests. And they find a man called by God willing to serve, and they give him a parish. And then he has, what do they call him? Like a deacon. So he's not really a priest. But in Catholic doctrine, a deacon can baptize. So after some time, my friend realizes, in this community, there are no baptisms at all. Because he has not baptized any child. But lo and behold, baptisms are happening, actually. Because the people have decided that they will have their children baptized by the deacon and not the priest. Because the deacon is, in German parlance, an echte, so a real German, and the priest is not. The priest is a man with a German passport. That's a very critical distinction in German language. So you can have a German passport or you can be a German. A person like me can have a German passport, but not be a German. Systemic racism sometimes, and in most cases, is our greatest problem. However, this is driven by most powerful institutions. And these institutions will always sacrifice the individuals that we accuse of racial prejudice. So when a young man or a young woman at the airport mistreats me, the system will not say, we will clean ourselves so that we take out these kinds of things. The system will sacrifice this young man, destroy his or her life completely, so that the system itself remains exactly as it was. Racial prejudices are in most cases provided for by the system as a way of self-preserving. They will always have individuals to sacrifice. And because these prejudices are what most of us encounter directly, we then miss out on the systemic part. So I always say to people, I have problems with racial prejudices, but my greatest enemy is systemic racism. I'm not willing to co-sacrifice the young woman, the young man who is equally a victim of these racist systems. Because sometimes they don't even realize they are also a victim. Now, colonization and decolonization, or decolonization and decoloniality, bring us back to this. If we don't come here, then they don't make sense at all. There's a correlation between colonization, imperialism on the one hand, and mission and evangelization on the other hand. So, in some contexts, evangelization and mission actually preceded colonization and imperialism. In Zimbabwe, the colonial settlers came after the first missionaries. But there's also a fact about this. These early missionaries were not successful. They really tried a soft approach to evangelization. They didn't have military force. They did not have a lot of other instruments of coercion that they could use. They really wanted people to see the beauty of the Christian faith and convert to this faith out of their willing and out of the conviction that we have been provided a better alternative. In Zimbabwe, it didn't succeed. That approach was unsuccessful. So the missionaries retreated out of Zimbabwe. Then, a few decades later, colonial settlers came. And they needed chaplains because they were Christian. Most of the colonial settlers from Great Britain, from Germany, from Belgium, they were mostly Christians. And so they needed chaplains. So European explorers, colonial settlers moving abroad to seek new opportunities. Capitalism is getting stronger and stronger, and people are realizing it is possible to be filthy rich if you can identify an opportunity and exploit it. And the idea of colonization or imperialism was direct or indirect domination and control of foreign societies, especially so that they could have access to the resources that were running out in Central and Western Europe, in as much as their industries were growing. So resources are going down, the industries are growing, and therefore you need to find an alternative source for resources. But moving into these communities, a lot of lies were created, like that these people didn't have laws or systems and all these things. We know these were lies because almost all these communities were organized to a certain degree, differently, but they were organized. They then established colonial legal systems that made it legal for them to do whatever they wanted in these territories. The establishment and control of the colonial economic system, whereas we or our ancestors were trading in real things, cows, sheep, goats, right? These were normally the modes of measuring wealth. And children. Yes, children. As many children. Children were a form of wealth. Not only because they provided labor, because most of these communities were agricultural and they were not as mechanized as agriculture is today. So agriculture depended on labor. It was labor intensive. So the more workforce you had, the better the prospects of you producing enough food plus surplus. But labor could not be hired because Kati has her own field. So she has to work in her own field. Risto has her own field, and I have my own field. So none of us can hire labor from each other. So Risto has to produce his own labor force. I have to do the same, Kati has to do the same. So the more children you have, the wealthier you are likely to be. So if I needed a goat, I try and negotiate with Risto. So how many goats will you give me in exchange for a cow? And so we agree, maybe 10 goats and a cow. So we do the exchange. I do my rituals because some rituals only needed a goat and not a cow. So, right? So these are the kinds of things, the real life experiences. And then somebody walks into this community and says, you see, your cow with all its four legs, the tail and the horns, will be equivalent to this piece of paper. This is what we call money, my friend. Give me your cow, I give you money. Cow is useless. Money is what you need. So you take the money, he takes the cow. And then the ancestors speak to you in the night when you are sleeping and say, my friend, go take that cow back. You go back to this guy and say, you know what? I have made up my mind. I don't need this piece of paper. I need my cow back. And then the guy says, well, if you need your cow back, since it is now mine, I need 4 of these knots. All of a sudden, this piece of paper has lost value overnight. Indigenous communities became the greatest victims of a capitalist system. Lost everything of naught, of value that they had, land, livestock, everything they lost. And then in return, they are offered jobs. So you become a farm worker, you become an industry worker, you become, and then some of us become glorified servants working as professors and so on, right? But we don't have anything of note. We get these notes whose value we have no control over. So we are at the mercy of someone somewhere who can simply wake up one day and say the euro has lost value. How? If it was a cow, then you say your cow has broken its leg, so it might not survive this injury, so I cannot pay you the full value. At least I can see where the value has gone to, the broken leg. What of with this note? No idea. So dispossession of indigenous peoples, means of production, land, gone. And then that land does not disappear. It simply changes hands, ownership. But the epistemological, spiritual, theological, and cultural domination of the colonized was also very central within the colonial setup. Our people were told, you don't know anything, right? And you have no ways of knowing even. Your spirituality is one of the reasons why you are damned to go to hell. Leave it. You can't even imagine God because you never had God until we brought him from Europe, right? So European missionaries honestly believed they had packed God into the ships to go to Africa. Cultural domination. If you wanted to be a decent, progressive human being, you had to dress like a European, you had to eat like a European, you had to do things like a European. That was a mark of progress. That's the colonial system. Now, when you put the missionaries on the other side, and Risto has already answered that question for us, a missionary who went to India could not see the difference between the missionary and the colonizer. There was no difference. Because the missionary, as in Zimbabwe, the colonizer was coming from Great Britain, and most of the missionaries were coming from Great Britain. And sometimes when we travel abroad, our own home countries and regions get smaller and smaller the further we travel away from our homes. So there are people in Zimbabwe who live in areas that I really consider to be very far away. I come from the Eastern Highlands in Zimbabwe, and my wife comes from the southwest of Zimbabwe. Under normal circumstances, I have no business visiting her place until I saw her, obviously. And then I started realizing that place was so near to my home because she was there. But then when I meet somebody from South Africa, even from Nigeria sometimes, it looks like Zimbabwe and Nigeria are so close to each other. So we form very close bonds when we realize we are all foreigners far away from home. We begin to see our homes as being nearer and nearer. So European missionaries from Germany, Belgium, Finland, Norway, Sweden, once they traveled away from Europe, realized that they belonged together. So Finnish missionaries didn't have to apply for privileges from a British colonial system. Privileges were simply given to them. They were fellow Europeans, unless they were Irish. I think the Irish struggled the most to be classified as white. That I found that fascinating in American history, that the Irish had to apply for decades, possibly being sent to medical doctors for examination if they really were white. Maybe they thought their skin was upside down, so the dark part of their skin was inside, so the doctors had to investigate if they really were white. So these are the realities. So missionaries, which were mainly European males, and therefore superior by everything, and missionaries also did do some things very powerful that set them apart from the colonial settlers. In Zimbabwe, I learned from history that the colonial government set up hospitals in the urban centers there to treat only the Africans that had submitted to working for the system. Because the Africans that chose to work for the colonial system would be the ones that moved into the urban areas. And that's where the hospitals, the colonial hospitals, were. It was actually the missionaries that went and then set up health centers in the rural areas where the Africans that were resisting the colonial structures remained. So the nearest hospitals were in most cases mission hospitals. The nearest schools for ordinary Africans were mission schools. So there's always need to find that balance between some of the good things, but also the other bad things that were associated with that. So in some cases, missionaries set up good mission hospitals, but on lands that had been forcefully taken away from indigenous people. So a good is built on a bad foundation. I don't know which one neutralizes the other. But it's clear that missionaries and colonizers were not always one and the same thing. And it's important, I think, to appreciate that. So again, there's some slight intersection. That's what I try to do again with these 3 circles. Slight intersection between the colonizers and the evangelizers. But they are both targeting the new world, where they're encountering different people, different religions, vast tracts of land, abundant natural resources, different epistemologies. These were people with their own forms of knowledge and their own ways of knowing, and they had their own kinds of spiritualities. But both are interested in this new world, with the colonizers really focusing more and more on political domination that would allow them to economically plunder and exploit this new world. But on the other side, with this faith motivation that says, we have to convert the world to Jesus Christ so that things can get better. But there are also some overlaps in terms of epistemological domination, both the colonial and the evangelical or evangelizing missions were both interested in controlling the knowledge and the ways of knowing. And that, for me, and particularly for us, that is critical because it also points to our understanding of theology. So, on the other hand, when we now move to decolonization and decoloniality, we understand that colonization was not simply a forceful movement. If it had been simply a forceful movement, it would have collapsed after a few decades. Because that's what was happening from ancient times. There is always a season for a new empire to emerge, dominate, and crumble. Why did this new colonial empire and system survive for so long? Because it realized you needed more than just political force or military force. You needed to control the software in as much as you needed the hardware. The software is where the epistemological colonization happened. The entire education system in Zimbabwe, which has been credible for so long and for which I am a beneficiary. When I went to Germany and applied from Zimbabwe with my certificates from Zimbabwe, I wasn't even asked to submit them for vetting. It was Zimbabwean Cambridge certificates. Cambridge is UK. So if the British have said you are good enough, then you are good enough. When I applied for some opportunities after my master's degree, there were always sometimes question marks about a master's from the University of Zimbabwe. We know, it used to be good. It used to be good, yeah, but we're not quite too sure now. Okay? Then I went for my PhD in Germany. And all of a sudden, the question marks on my Zimbabwean certificates disappeared. Because the Germans have certificated you. Oh, you have to be good. We know the Germans. This is epistemological domination. We need to be qualified by people that are trusted by this system. That's colonial thinking. So decolonization, in a way, is an attempt to resist this colonial thinking, colonial logic. It is a process that seeks to challenge the way colonial ideology has structured our world, in which some people are always put to the test. They have to be verified. They have to be controlled. Otherwise, they will not get opportunities. A world in which we are constantly told this is a world run on meritocracy, right? That everything that we have is based on merit, that we work for these things. I don't believe that. Because if it was purely on merit, then it should be a kind of a random kind of ways of success and so on. Why is success following clear particular patterns and lines if it's purely merit? What is happening? Am I here on merit only? I don't think so. I think this world is rigged. I come from Zimbabwe, so rigged is a very common word in Zimbabwe. We have a lot of elections that are always disputed because there's always the belief that, well, one of the parties is always a player and a referee. How can that outcome ever be clearly unrigged? So in Zimbabwean elections, until and unless the opposition wins, the election is always rigged. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know. But this idea, I mean, imagine if you're playing any kind of sport and your opponent with whom you are fighting for victory is also supposed to be enforcing the laws of the game. How can the outcome be fair? So I always look at myself as a recipient of divine grace, not merit. I think what I do, there are many people out there that could do it. Some of them are hopelessly let down by the system. All they do now is wake up, drink, sleep, and wait for death. But divine grace, I could be doing possibly that, unless and until divine grace located me and somehow cleared a path for me. So I don't claim merit for a lot of things that happen to me, because I don't think the system that runs this world ever thought that they were planning to have me in Finland today. No, they would rather have me somewhere in the back of the beyond in Zimbabwe and just being useless and waiting for death. But somehow God has a way of, I'll not say the word that I wanted to say. It would not right in this kind of setup, but God has a way of giving a slap in the face to this system once in a while. And some of us find ourselves lifted up. And I think the onus is on us sometimes to say, we have made it against the will of the system. And there are many of us who are like this. There are some here who possibly would not be here because they are women. And yet at some point, God decided that even women could be ordained, right? I come from a church that continues to refuse to ordain women. So I know what I'm talking about. So I have 2 young women from Zimbabwe, brilliant, and I believe called individuals, but they had to leave Zimbabwe to go to the United Kingdom so they could pursue their call. Can you imagine that? So yes, sometimes God has a way of dealing with the system. Decolonization involves challenging particular systems. And decolonization, sometimes we have the misunderstanding that it is a fight that is being waged by Black people on white people. That is not decolonization at all. Decolonization is what both Black people, white people, yellow people have to do, because we are all controlled by this colonial system. Either the colonial system has taken away from us in a very unfair way, or it has given us things that we don't need, actually, because we could work for ourselves, but the colonial system keeps giving us. So it keeps contaminating us in a way. So we are all victims to a certain extent. So decolonization is not a white on black or black on white. It is beyond that. Just as I said earlier, I can be white, right? I don't have to do skin bleaching to achieve whiteness. I just need to identify where I can get power, wealth. Those are the 2 key markers for whiteness. So you can have the lighter skin pigment and still be Black. In apartheid South Africa, I don't know if you know, that there was white and then a middle way for the Japanese, because they were not too sure. The Japanese were not fully white, but they were not fully Black. The Chinese, the Indians belonged with the Black. For a long time, the middle route was only for the Japanese. The European was white, the Japanese middle, and everybody else Black. So Blackness is not even really simply about skin pigmentation. It is ideological. So there are many people that we see as white that the colonial white supremacist system would not qualify as white. You have to have certain possessions or access to certain things to achieve whiteness. You are not born white. You have to achieve it. But it's easier to achieve if you have the lighter skin pigmentation, right? So there is an advantage to that, but it's not the only requirement. That's why, like I said, the Irish struggled to become white in the United States. Decoloniality, on the other hand, recognizes that in most countries, direct colonization ended soon after World War II. A lot of countries that were colonized in the overseas, the European countries realized the amount of work that was needed to rebuild after World War II would not allow them time to distribute their attention into the colonial settlements as well. So they gave up the colonial countries' independence, but they were very wise. They gave political independence. That's all they gave away. They continue to control the economy through their international multilateral corporations and everything. So they continue to control the economy, but gave away the public face of these states, became the face of the local people. But they continue to control. So the colonial system didn't die. The education system, they continue to control the education system. Go to a seminary anywhere in Africa today, 90% of the books are from Risto, from Kati, and very rarely from Masiiwa, right? If you want to be a theologian of note, you have to be in conversation with Karl Barth, Martin Luther, all these, and Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, all these big names. Because what Risto does is missiology. And when I do what Risto does, it becomes what? Contextual missiology, right? So what Europeans do is universal. What I do is contextual. So these are some of the things that we really need to battle with. So colonial thinking and logic continues in subtle ways. That's why we try to then have this idea of decoloniality. Let us always be on the lookout to resist and to challenge manifestations of colonial thinking. This is not about white people and black people. This is about ways of thinking. This is about ways of imagining the world. And that's why, for me, decolonization of the past, soon after World War II, did not succeed very much. Because first, it was constructed in a racial way. It was supposed to be what black people do, what Asians do on their own, against what white people were doing. It was structured in a way that it thought, and Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghanaian, said, "Seek ye the political kingdom, and everything else will be added unto it." That was the motivation. If we grab political power, then we will be able to control everything else. When they got into political offices, they realized out of all the colonial institutions of power, the political one was the weakest of them all. It controlled nothing. It was controlled by education. It was controlled by the economy. It was controlled by the culture. It was controlled by all other things, and it controlled nothing. So we have useless presidents. If they choose to make a political and economic statement, there is what is referred to as cash flight or capital flight or something along those lines. People simply withdraw all their monies from the banks in that country and leave, and the economy implodes. So we have real problems. And therefore, if we acknowledge that colonization has created real problems and that decolonization is an attempt to redress some of those problems, but it's not enough because we know that just cleaning a wound does not heal it. How do we begin to heal the wounds that have been created by the colonial system? And how do we begin to embrace this kind of thinking as ecumenical players, not only because we uphold the belief that all human beings are created equal, but because we have, in one way or the other, been impacted by the colonial harms that have happened in this world, either because we benefited from the colonial system or because we lost out on opportunities because the colonial system was frustrating us. So the ideas of decolonization and reparations are not only meant for people that identify as victims in a negative sense. These are conversations also for those that think our intentions were never meant to harm anybody. However, in the process of being ourselves and seeking to spread the gospel, we were coerced, forced, however this happened, but we ended up harvesting benefits that we never intended to have, and yet they still came our way. And those things came even at the expense of the health and well-being of our sisters and brothers from around the world. I think as ecumenical players, we owe it to ourselves and we are obliged as believers in the Christian faith to have these conversations around decolonizing, which is how can I begin to speak out against a system that gives me privileges that I don't merit? And how do I begin to say no to these privileges so that my sisters and brothers get equal opportunities like myself? I think, and this is part of the challenge with the ideas of non-racist and anti-racist. It's easy for people to say, I don't racially discriminate against anybody. But I think what the Christian faith demands from us is more the idea that I will not keep quiet when I see somebody being racially discriminated. Are we willing and ready to say to our own institution, the way we ended up with Kati and not Masiiwa was nothing short of racial prejudice? Are we willing to take our own institutions to task and begin to create fair and equal opportunities for all? Or do we want only to focus on the outside so we can begin to say, we see what is happening in Norway? And I know in Europe, the easiest target for Europe has always been the United States. The United States is that kind of family that doesn't know how to deal with things in-house. So each time there's a problem between husband and wife, they first go outside, strip themselves naked, and they start shouting to each other in the public. That's the United States. And Europe loves the United States because then we keep using the United States as where these bad things happen. And then we avoid looking at ourselves. So there was the recent report by the Fundamental Human Rights Group of the EU that also listed Finland. Finland came out first in a number of categories on racial justice indicators or racism indicators. in Europe. But sometimes even those reports don't find a lot of expression in Europe. If they were from the United States, I can assure you even pulpits in Europe would cite them. I think we need to be more intentional within Europe to begin to self-introspect. How did we fare during the colonial period? I'm an Anglican, and I'm not trying to lift up my own church, because I do have serious conversations with the Archbishop of Canterbury on the process and the outcome of their own self-examination. But I don't know if some of you followed it. They did a self-examination, which was very narrow focused. It was only on the transatlantic slave trade and not on colonization. You can imagine the level. The transatlantic slave trade was massive, it was brutal, it was everything, but the British Empire almost colonized the entire world. So you can imagine if the Church of England made around 2 billion or 4 billion pounds from the transatlantic slave trade, how many billions did they make from colonization? So the Archbishop told me, wait with that question, remind me after a year. Okay. So I'm waiting for the year to pass, and I will remind him. But they did self-investigate, which is, I think, commendable. And they realized, first, their, what is it called? This kind of a grant that they had from Queen Anne or somebody in the royal family, they invested that money in the company that ran the ships that were transporting Africans from West Africa to the Caribbean and to Latin America, as the Church of England. And they used the profits from those investments to pay poor priests, mostly priests based in rural England. So we're not talking of someone running a slave ship, then coming to church to give a tithe. We're talking of church investing its own money directly into this trade. I think it is important for ourselves, instead of waiting for some scholar to stumble upon some damning archival material, we might gain some level of credibility by reopening our own archives and beginning to share with the world some of the missteps that we made as an institution. That is the beginning of proper decolonization. We are disavowing the idea that we are superior in any way. We realize at some point we believed this. We now understand it was the wrong thing to believe, and we want to correct this. But it also means even taking stock of our materials that we are using to teach and train our children in the faith. I was checking a textbook that my wife is using to teach. She's teaching at the British School of Geneva. And I said to her, do you see that your book is full of racist connotations? Because when they are presenting healthcare and health services, they have a white doctor and some very poor, malnourished African children. This is in a school book, an international school. But some of these things are still finding expressions in church materials. So the devil is still black, isn't it? Or has he changed? Right? So sometimes we then hide by using black and white pictures. But when we use color pictures, then a lot of things begin to emerge. The devil is black with horns, or in some cases, if we want to teach children against stealing, the thief is black in most cases, and so on. Even police dogs are trained using some black imagery for a thief. So if they set a police dog among people, its first target is a black person. It's that kind of thing that even these systems, and that's why some of us are not sure of what to think about artificial intelligence. Who is programming it? How sure am I that racial stereotypes are not already being inbuilt into these systems? That when artificial intelligence is now running the airport as a whole, my being black and in the airport would possibly be making me a target of this. So we have genuine concerns and fears. But I think we need, as churches, to begin to take stock. And these are some of the questions that we might want to ask. Is contemporary ecumenism free from aspects or effects of coloniality? Is decolonization needed by all ecumenists or only those that were once colonized? What are the legacies of economic and epistemological privileges and deprivations that continue to shape contemporary ecumenical relations? Right? When I put my idea on the table and Risto puts his idea on the table, whose idea do you think the ecumenical movement will likely run with? Because I bring mine and then I am indicating to Kati that I need a transport fare. Can you give me €5 because I need to buy lunch? Can you all this list of needs? And Risto comes up with an idea and says, Kati, is your budget balancing? Because, I have some money that I don't know how to use. Which idea goes? I mean, these are realities within the ecumenical movement. Some ideas always find a way of being successful because they are backed by resources. So how are we relating with our partners, with our sister churches, or is it they are daughter churches or son churches? I don't know what kind of relationships we have, but we need to be much more mindful and honest about these conversations. And therefore, is reparations or reparatory justice an ecumenical concern? Do we need to repair any harms that have happened in this world? That's the first. For what must the ecumenical movement engage in reparations conversations? We don't want to simply talk about reparations unless we know why we have to talk about reparations. Have there been benefits? Have there been deprivations? Have there been traumatic experiences? All these things require reparations. And sometimes this world, because it's so capitalist, it soils conversations by always quickly resorting to, so what is the financial cost? Reparations is much more than financial payments. So let's not be drawn into these financial calculative kinds of conversations. Let's begin to think in terms of repairing. It is possible to repair without cash. It is possible to repair without the kinds of economic indicators that capitalism prizes so much. What form must the reparations take and who decides? So when the Church of England produced its report, they triggered others. So there was a new association that was formed called Heirs of Former Enslavers or something along those lines. That said, oh yeah, we realize our ancestors did wrong and therefore we are setting aside 100 billion or 100 million, I don't know, whatever amount they came up with to repair some of the damage. In consultation with who? Why do you think 100 million or 1 million or 1 trillion is what is needed? Who told you they need 100 million? I was asking my own church, because my own church put 100 million. And I said, so what fraction is 100 million from what you made from the investment? And how much does emotional trauma cost, by the way? Can you put that in financial terms? So you see how capitalism spoils conversations. Harms cannot always be reduced to dollars and pounds. But we can only learn this if we begin to engage in honest conversations with people that are struggling with intergenerational trauma, people that are struggling with self-acceptance. It takes a lot of courage for me to come to Finland. And knowing I'm going to be speaking to white people, or supposedly white people, ideologically white people, right? Under normal circumstances, I should be happier to be invited to go to Rwanda, where I'm talking to people that look like me. It's easier that way. But it's because sometimes you keep asking yourself, do I have to tell them I have a PhD? Or do I just go into the conversation and then, so how do I make myself acceptable and worthy? You know, these are things that people like me have to deal with. It's the trauma of being dehumanized, indirectly and directly sometimes. So when I come here, I always tell people, I don't believe it's because I'm that good. I believe God has just made me one of the instruments that God uses. And I believe many others could do what I'm doing if God had decided to use them. But there are people out there that are so traumatized. I know of young women that look like me, but 2 years down the line, they're looking more and more like Kati, because they're ingesting chemicals to try and get rid of their blackness. This is what this world has done to them. It's only when they are looking white physically that they might gain self-confidence. So how do we begin to speak about these things within the ecumenical movement? That it is okay to be who you are. You are as an image of God as anybody else. But that has not always been the case. So in a way, ecumenism, decolonization, and reparations, for me, looks like a cycle. So it never ends, because there are always new harms happening, whether we like it or not. So it should be in a secular fashion. But it should begin with acknowledgement of the past. We can't simply wish the past away. I wish we could, but we can't. Because today is built on the past, and it is already providing a foundation for the future. So we need to acknowledge. Then we need to confess sometimes the things where we have made the missteps, where we have made the wrong decisions. I think it's important to confess as Christians. We repent. These are things that we do. And I think honest decolonization and reparation can only begin after repentance. If we have not acknowledged our complicity or our direct involvement, and if we have not confessed what we have done wrong, and if we have not repented that this cannot happen again, then decolonization doesn't mean anything. Because decolonization is about re-engineering this world. It's not simply about destroying what it is. It is about creating a new hope. It is about creating a new understanding, a new reality of being the image of God, a new reality of being one body in Christ. I always, at some point, I was asking my professor in Germany, is it possible that the one body has spare parts? You know, the kind of thing where you have your car and then you have the winter tires and the summer tires, and you have the spare battery and so on. That at some point, maybe the spare battery might be needed. You know, there are times when I feel like that. Like I actually am not part of the original one body, but, you know, I might be a spare part of this one body. Can we begin to make everybody feel like the one body does not need spare parts, that we all make up this one body? There are times when it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't. And until the one body now really feels like it is one body, then the question of reparations can begin. Because then if we only have one arm, if that arm is injured, we need to repair it, to heal it, because there is no spare hand. But if it feels like there is a spare hand, we might as well amputate this one and put the replacement. I think we do have some fundamental challenges to deal with in order for us to begin an honest decolonization and reparation. And only can we begin to leave the other part of the overarching theme of the World Council of Churches, reconciliation and unity. We can only begin to think of reconciliation belong to the same body with you. There are times when it feels like Christ has many bodies. A white body, a black body, a yellow body, and yes. But reconciliation and unity are possible if we have dealt with the harms that have happened, and if we have honestly decided to repair these harms. The modern or contemporary ecumenical movement, for whom the WCC is the most non-representative, has been entangled with the Western racist political, economic, cultural, and epistemological systems for centuries. This is true. The ecumenical movement beginning around 1910, right? I don't know the setup. I was challenging the new director of Faith and Order. I think sometimes they think like, maybe we shouldn't have invited you into the Nicene conversations, because I asked him, can you give me the ethnic demographic breakdown of the people that attended the first Council of Nicaea? And he looked at me and said, are you serious? I said, yes, I am very serious. Because I have a strong feeling there were Black Africans sitting at the Council of Nicaea 1,700 years ago, but today I'm made to feel like I don't belong in this faith. So I need a breakdown of who was there. So we have a conversation around that. Now he realizes I'm serious, and so we're beginning to go into the archives and try to find where we can find some information and so on to try and establish these facts. Why is it that when we think of Augustine, we remove from conversations ethnic identities? But when we speak of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, do we tire of telling ourselves he was German? Why is that so? Are we ashamed of claiming that Black Africans might have made some contributions? You know, these are the kinds of things, conversations that trigger me. It's not my fault. It's the WCC's fault. They said I should always apply the racial justice lens in my work. So I try to do that, and sometimes colleagues feel I'm being a nuisance. But I'm not. I just see sometimes the funny side of how this world has changed. There was a time when Black people were thriving in Europe, right? There are Black people that have been in Europe for more than 800 years. And that part of history is almost being erased. And we are trying, with your replacement, Peter, we're trying to uncover that. These Black narratives. And we know in the Roman Empire, in the Roman systems, that there were Black people that were there. And they were there, and there was no problem with their Blackness. So Europe was not always racist. It wasn't. Europe was not always racist. It began somewhere. These systems have caused great harms over centuries that have resulted in detrimental power asymmetries, economic disparities, and serious cases of the genocide of knowledges and the genocide of spiritualities in many places. That's epistemicide and spiritualicide are in many places around the world, and intergenerational trauma is real. Racism is real. I was telling colleagues yesterday that I look at my daughter and she confuses me because she was conceived in Zimbabwe. So we left Zimbabwe when my wife was pregnant. Then she was born in Germany. And then we went into lockdown, and then even before lockdown ended, we moved to Geneva, where she is now in a public preschool and moving into a public school in August. So likely she will be a fluent French speaker soon. Now, who is she? So when my wife, because she was born and then we went into lockdown, my mother and my wife's parents did not see her until she was 2. And then my wife took her to Zimbabwe. And they were all so happy because my wife had brought them the family's German, right? So when she goes to Zim, everybody is calling her our German. When she comes to Germany, and when she was born, we were confused. You know, we are not lawyers. My wife is a teacher and I'm a theologian or a biblical scholar in reality. And so we don't know a lot about laws. I only know about the 10 Commandments and nothing more than that. But then the 10 Commandments don't work anywhere anymore. It's so I went and said, we want to travel with our daughter. And the German official said, my friend, you have to go back to Zimbabwe to get your daughter a passport. And I said, how do I do that? Because she's here in Germany, how do I take her to Zimbabwe without a travel document? And she cannot travel on a birth certificate, which is the only thing the Germans were willing to give her. So I realized, okay, I think in some cases are better spoken in my mother language. So I went to Berlin, to the Zimbabwean embassy and said, okay, this is my problem. And they said, oh, okay, that's not a big problem. Bring the German birth certificate, bring her here because we want to physically see her and touch her that she's actually a baby. Otherwise, you want us to process documents for a baby that you want to steal. So I had to go back 250 kilometers away and brought my daughter back to Berlin, and they looked at her, they saw her, they asked my wife to breastfeed her to be sure it was our child. She did. For us, breastfeeding is not a shameful thing. I see sometimes in Europe that people have this very negative understanding of breastfeeding. So we did, they were convinced she was, and then they gave us some documents, we signed them. Then we had to send them to Zimbabwe via DHL and asked a colleague in Zimbabwe to take them to the birth certificate registry to procure a Zimbabwean birth certificate for her, because that's the only way she could then apply for a Zimbabwean passport. You can't apply for a Zimbabwean passport using a German birth certificate. This is the world. So she has a German birth certificate, a Zimbabwean birth certificate, and a Zimbabwean passport. And maybe in a few years, she might even qualify for a Switzerland passport. Who does she become? So we have a lot of people that are living in these liminal spaces, neither here nor there. I always looked at Barack Obama as the global face of individuals living in liminal space. When he goes to Kenya, he's too white to be truly Kenyan. When he gets to the US, he's too dark to be truly white. These are the realities. And you can imagine the trauma, even as the United States president, that he has to deal with, because he doesn't really know where he belongs. Raised by a white mother in a white community, but never achieving whiteness. Finally, in order to address racially motivated injustices whose real impact has been felt because systemically racialized communities were denied opportunities in various spheres of life, including within faith communities. Ecumenism has an obligation to decolonize and repair as its commitment to anti-racist interventions within the movement and without in wider society. Thank you.